new details about former President Trump and his lawyers' effort to delay the certification of the 2020 election. An email turned over to the January 6th Select Committee indicates one of Trump's lawyers thought Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas would be key to their plans. CNN's Caitlin Polantz helped to break this story. Caitlin, fill us in.
Well, here we have in writing now these emails where Donald Trump's lawyers were discussing what to do whenever they were filing cases after the election to overturn the result of that election. And these emails, we are now seeing them in writing. This is exactly what was said that convinced a federal judge in recent months that they may have been engaged in planning a crime, specifically obstructing Congress or defrauding the United States after that election. So I want to read some of these emails because we knew about them before. That federal judge, David O. Carter, had described them in court, but now we're actually seeing them because they were provided in a link in a court filing last night, very early in the morning. So one of them is from attorney Ken Chesebro. He was working for Donald Trump to challenge the election. He wrote to other attorneys on December 31st, 2020, if we can just get this case pending before the Supreme Court by January 5th, ideally with something positive written by a judge or justice, hopefully Thomas, I think it's our best shot at holding up the count of a state in Congress. So there's Chesebro specifically saying they want to get this before a favorable judge. They want to challenge the election in court, not because they wanted to litigate it, but because they wanted a reason for Congress not to assert Joe Biden as the president and instead keep the possibility alive that Donald Trump could continue challenging the election. Chesebro also wrote in another email on December 31st, New Year's Eve 2020, possibly Thomas would end up being the key here. Circuit justice, right? We want to frame things so that Thomas could be the one to issue some sort of stay or other circuit justice opinion saying Georgia is in legitimate doubt. So this was a legal challenge that they were bringing in Georgia in federal court, that Donald Trump was attesting to the truth of facts in a case, and Justice Thomas would have been the person to receive that challenge. Of course, he also has been under a political furor because of some of his wife's comments about wanting to challenge the election as well. Back to you.
And of course, just a reminder to our viewers that it was eventually the Supreme Court as a whole entity rejected any of these cases related to election fraud lawsuits that the Trump team and his allies brought. And that was even after the insurrection. So they didn't even take up the cases ultimately. Caitlin Polantz, thank you so much. CNN legal analyst Norm Eisen's joining us now. Norm, what's so stunning about this, though, is the why. Why would they think that Clarence Thomas would support them? If you're on the January 6th committee, are you digging deeper into that now?
Anna, definitely. We know that Clarence Thomas had a completely alternative view of the law and the universe. He said that it was befuddling and inexplicable that the Supreme Court did not intervene to investigate these completely bogus, legally and factually unfounded claims. So they saw correctly that he was an ally. And then, of course, there are the questions about his conflicts involving his wife, Ginny Thomas.
Right, and all the text messages she exchanged with people who were part of the efforts to try to stop the legal transfer of power, the certification of the election on a state level and beyond. Norm, justices, we know, are supposed to recuse even if there's an appearance of conflict of interest, right? So does this fit the bill here?
Anna, in any other court in the country, under federal law, a judge who had a spouse who had been advocating a position in this completely illegitimate attack on the election, which has been characterized by another court, federal court in California, as an attempted coup that is likely criminal. Any other judge would have to recuse. In the Supreme Court, you know who makes that decision? Clarence Thomas. That doesn't make sense in a democracy. As somebody who's practiced ethics for more than 3 decades, who's advised President Obama and other public officials on this, he should not have heard that case, and he should not be hearing anything relating to January 6th today.
Norm Eisen, as always, I appreciate your insights. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Anna.